Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Ashland, Massachusetts, and I'm really thrilled to be here for this fantasy romance panel with Whitney Hill, Darynda Jones, Nicolette Andrews, and HR or Harriet Moore. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in just a minute, but I just wanted to say a couple things. One is that we are streaming this on Facebook, and here, of course, and you can ask questions here in the Q&A, and I'll be paying attention to that. Please use the chat for any chatter. Let us know where you're coming from and how excited you are to be here in the chat. And if you have any tech issues, put them in the chat as well. I'll take care of those. I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library for supporting all of our adult programming. We couldn't do any of this without them. So without further ado, I'm going to very quickly introduce our authors, and then we'll go right into a discussion. So Whitney Hill is, I'm just going to say one thing about each, and I'll ask them to tell us about themselves. So Whitney is the founder of Benue Media. Am I saying that right?
Benue Media, yeah.
Media, an indie publishing imprint, and it's so interesting that she started that on her own when she was just like, oh, I'm not going to go for, I'm not going to wait for somebody to hire me. Darynda Jones is the author of the sultry Sunshine Vikram mystery series and the sexy Charlie Davidson paranormal mystery series. I can't wait to hear more about her relationships and how she creates them. HR Moore, or Harriet, as I said, is the founder of FaRoFeb, which is Fantasy Romance February. Is that right? And I'm thrilled about that because I think that having a spotlight on one of my favorite subgenres of romance is wonderful. She's coming to us from England, so I think it's like 7 p.m. there, maybe just around dinner time. Nicolette Andrews writes fierce women, and I love that. Charming heroes, and she sometimes destroys their feelings, readers' feelings. She does like to torture her characters. So we'll be learning more about that as well. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And let's get started with, please tell me about yourself. And I'm going to start with Whitney since I started with you with your intro.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I am Whitney Hill. I am based out of Durham, North Carolina. So I saw somebody from North Carolina there. Hey. And I write paranormal romance and urban fantasy with romantic undertones. Everything I write has got romantic subplot. And I love the topic we're talking about today, complex relationships, because I love playing with those kind of power dynamics and seeing how all that shifts in a romantic or in a platonic situation. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Whitney. Brenda?
Hello, I'm from New Mexico, and I write paranormal mystery, paranormal women's fiction, straight mystery, young adult, pretty much everything. Working on a middle grade, but again, everything, even my middle grade, which is probably why it will never sell, has romantic elements in it.
Well, of course, because romance makes the world go round, right?
Exactly.
Harriet?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Romance makes the world go round. I have romance in all of my books, unsurprisingly. So I write both epic fantasy romance and first world fantasy romance books set in our world. My latest series is the Ancient Souls series, and that features ancient secret nations of people who reincarnate, with all the kind of, there are feuds and backstories and things that go back for hundreds of years. So I love the topic of this panel in terms of complexity, because that lends itself to a lot of complexity and a lot of history that comes forward to the present day.
Mm-hmm. And that's so unique. I really love that. Nicolette?
So I'm Nicolette. Live in Southern California, San Diego specifically, my whole life. I'm the author of 16 romantic fantasy novels as of right now. And like you said, I'm the one that likes to torture the characters. I love emotional angst. I'm there for the romance, but I never want it straightforward. It never has to be simple. There has to be, some kind of complication involved. So that's my favorite thing to do. So I'm excited to talk about that and hear what everybody else has to say. So yeah.
Thank you. So the topic of today's conversation is creating characters and relationships, both platonic and romantic. And so I have a bunch of questions about that. Like, in creating relationships, what is the most important element in creating your characters that have these relationships? Is it a shared history, shared interest, personality, humor? What gets you started on what you know is going to be a relationship? And I'm going to start with Darynda this time.
I knew you were going to start with me. Oh my gosh, it kind of depends on the book and the characters. And I mean, obviously there has to be some obstacle. Something has to be, that this has to be keeping them apart, or something has to be in the way. But mostly in my books, usually my heroine is, because I write comedy with darker moments. There are definitely dark moments. But usually my heroine is the spunky one, and the one who is just irreverent and does her own thing, and the hero's a little more down to earth. And so I think personality conflicts are fun to play with. But then of course, he has to come around to her way of thinking. And just little things I think that you can throw in, environmental factors, and then other, like your side characters, what are they doing to their relationship, and just make it as complex as you can. Again, like Nicolette said, I love torturing my characters, so that's part of it.
But can I just they should have said there's two parts of that, because one is you're talking more maybe about your romantic relationships or characters. Yes. What about your friendships and characters?
I think that, I guess it depends. I think that I always have one character who is just with my main character, no matter what, just has her back, no matter what. I just feel like that's so important in life. And for me, I've had really good friends in my life. My sister is my best friend, and I'm not gonna lie, I have based characters on her. And I think that that's important. And then of course also just the whole rhetoric and the banter that goes on between the friends. I think the side relationships are just as important as the main one. That personally, I have a lot of friendships, things going on, and families, drama, and that sort of thing going on.
Right. Harriet?
I don't know if I start with any one thing. I think there's always things that bind them together and things that pull them apart. I think both with romantic relationships and platonic ones. I love big casts. Some people hate that. I think it's more of a fantasy reader love rather than a romance reader love. But I love playing with big casts of characters, and I think it allows you to do so much more with the characters in some ways, because you've got all of these other influences who are also playing off that character, and I think you can get multiple views of the character based on how they interact with multiple different people. So for me, it's about trying to make them kind of a consistent, holistic person, and I can kind of explore that through how they relate to a number of different people, whether that's a friend, whether that's someone who's essentially their family. I always tend to have kind of power dynamics as well, in terms of structures where there are people who are more powerful than others. And so I think that also kind of plays into, okay, well, where do my characters sit within that overall structure? And and how do they interact with other powerful people? So I think I try and kind of make them as rounded as possible, and have all of these different kind of things that they have to play off, and that kind of helps me develop them as people and develop their relationships with others.
Nicolette?
Sorry, I was muted. So before I can even get into the relationships, I have to figure out who they are as individuals. And so most of the time when I'm starting out, romantic or friends or siblings or whatever, I usually figure out what's their emotional wound, because I feel like most people can relate to that feeling of something that shaped them as a person. And then like what motivates them. Like, even if it's not somebody that necessarily has a growth as a character, I need to know what they're after. And in some ways, to make it more complex, like if I'm trying to make their relationship more nuanced, if they're what they want is slightly unaligned, I think it makes for interesting things. And I think that sometimes if they have similar emotional wounds, like best friend kind of characters, it can be something where, like, if you ever had like your friend that you like have kind of dark sense. I have a dark sense of humor, so like a lot of my characters will make jokes about like dark things that happen to them, and it's like, haha, this horrible thing happened to us, and it bonds them together, and it creates good banter and things like that, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, because I know we've all been through it. Whitney?
Yeah, I mean, I guess pretty similar to Harriet and Nicolette. Like, I want to know, what are the power dynamics here? Who is this character in the space? Obviously, I'm coming from a background of multiple marginalizations, so I'm thinking of my own experience moving through a space, the challenges that affords, the things that I have to navigate, and how do I make that realistic for a character as an individual? Because, you know, even as we're engaging in relationships, whatever those are, with people, we're bringing in our own experiences that shape how we're reacting, not only to other people, but also to, you know, the scene, the setting, the, you know, events that are occurring. I want to know about, you know, their goals, their motivations, like, why are they doing this? I want to know, I basically go into it saying, like, who hurt you? Because again, that's going to drive, like, how are we, you know, responding to this thing? Maybe it's a small comment, but because of something that happened, you know, 10 years ago, they're still, you know, upset about it. So trying to think as a whole person, who are they? And then asking, what do they need to heal? Because I think that's part of, you know, the happily ever after, the happily for now for any romance, is like, how do we get them from this place of, you know, lack or damage or harm or hurt into a place of satisfaction or contentment, or, you know, just flat out happiness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Actually brings up all of you bring up a really interesting question for me, which is not on my list of questions, so I'm going to ask it anyways. Is that, you know, this whole, for me as a long-term romance reader, the friendships are sort of relatively new. It was always like the male, I'm going to say the male-female characters that really drove the story in the past. And I love the, you know, the depth of the book reading now because there are friendships. But you know, it's often like, now I have a teenage daughter, and you know, her friends like give up their friends when they have a boyfriend, or you know, and whatever. So like, how do you incorporate sort of those like real things that happen in real life as for people with trying to create that world where it's more authentic? And I'm going to start with Harriet for this weird question.
So I would say I don't think that anyone's experience is exactly the same as anyone else's, or you know, so I feel like I think the question is, how do you incorporate kind of real life things alongside what you need to move the story forward? Is that sort of what you're saying?
The romance forward. How do you keep their real life going while you still have this romance that you want to move forward?
For the characters. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the beauty of fantasy romance, is that you have these two parts that you can play with. So I think the real life is the fantasy and the fantasy plot and what's happening there, and then the romance is the thing that plays against, or that plays into. So for me, I never find it that hard, because I think so long as the two are kind of interwoven together, I think you might run into difficulties if, you know, or one as an author might, if you kind of try and do these things separately and have the romances nothing to do with what's going on with the plot. That would probably be tricky. So I think so long as they're kind of carefully woven together, or they're forced together, you know, the romance might be for them to achieve the quest that they have to go on. They are, you know, the two main characters are forced together, and that, even though they might be unlikely to, you know, to be together in real life, that kind of something has to move them together as part of the main plot, I think.
Mm-hmm. Since it's such a weird question, does anybody else want to sort of jump in on it, and then I can just go to my next one? Darynda?
I was just going to say, that I agree completely with Harriet, that they're not, it is hard to separate them. And just, I feel like if you do, you're possibly, maybe you're not weaving them together well enough, but also that the real life stuff can be part of the obstacle for your romance, you know. And you see this a lot in young adult, where the best friend is jealous of the boyfriend and that sort of thing, and it goes from there. But yeah, so I think that as long as you recognize it and you address it, that, you know, it all plays and it's woven together well, I think that it all works.
True. Anybody else? Because I can go on to my next question. Okay, so this was an interesting one for me in terms of platonic relationship, is how do you write platonic relationships between male and female so it doesn't get muddied? Nicolette, I'm going to start with you there.
So I really enjoy female-male friendship. I think it's something that we don't see explored a lot without like there becoming, I mean, sometimes when there is like unrequited attention, it creates a nice tension within the story. But I think just in general, it's interesting because preferably for me, I don't like it when the male gets so jealous that he ruins the relationship, like the actual partner doesn't ruin the relationship. I think some jealousy can be attractive to a lot of readers, but I don't want it to be where she gives up a male friend to be with her partner. And as far as like building it, a lot of times, because I do play with it sometimes, a lot of times when they have just a male friend, a lot of it is the same kind of banter and the same kind of affection that you would expect from like a male love interest, where it's like he's still there to be supportive, but it's not a sexual relationship. So it's like a lot of the same kind of dynamics of they have the same kind of back and forth. You know, who did a really great job of it was, oh my gosh, Amanda Bouchette. In her Promise of Fire. She does a really great job of ingratiating the main character in with the male compatriots, and she just becomes like one of the guys. And it's just, I think when you're crafting it, the best thing to think about is to think about like how it's like in what ways it's different as far as like from a female friend, because a female friend, it's like you know, stereotypically they're there to talk to you, they're there to like be there, your vent buddy. And then like with a male friend, I think it's more about him being like a strength without the need for additional sexual attachment, I guess is the best way to say it.
Okay, Whitney?
I try to think of it in terms of like, what do each of them need out of the relationship? And what as the writer can I put in there for it not to be reasonable to find it romantically together? Maybe they have other objectives that, you know, are going along with each other. Maybe they are just not interested in each other. Maybe they're not interested in each other in terms of, you know, gender preferences. Even if we take gender out of it, you know, again, it comes back to needs. And I try not to do like the friend zone thing. But it's, you know, it is just like, how do we make this real? Like if you have, you know, a real life relationship with somebody of a different gender from yourself, you know, you already know that not everything has to be about romance. And that's kind of the fun thing about fantasy is, you know, we can reject the way that's kind of pushed on us societally, that like, ooh, there's got to be tension because you're not the same gender, or you're, you know, the gender that the other person's attracted to. So it's just bringing it back to, you know, harm, need, goal, and then healing, and seeing how we like pull these together as individuals to build a friendship rather than, you know, a romantic situation.
And it seems like it's an important aspect of writing romance because there is love in so many different ways that is appropriate and acceptable and allowed. And
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have friends that like, I tell them I love them when we hang up, you know, the phone. I don't have a romantic, you know, desire for them or a sexual desire for them, but they're like a sister, or you know, they're simply just a friend who I care about. And it's like, okay, how do we like as writers do more to bring that and show people and demonstrate that like, hey, we can just like love our friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't matter what their gender or all that is, because love is love, right? Darynda?
Yes, I love these relationships so much. To me, they just make the book so much more fun. Especially, you know, depending on how close. So in the Sunshine Vikram series, which is straight mystery, it's not fantasy, her best friend, my heroine's best friend is a guy. And I decided in the second book, I thought, you know what, I'm going to play with that. And so they decide, because their love's lives are in turmoil and all this stuff, they decide they're going to try hooking up, you know. And it, of course, is a disaster because they're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though it was a disaster, they learned a lot, and it turned out to be a really funny scene. And it was just, to me, it was very heartwarming, and it made us fall in love with him all the more, you know, because he was just so sweet about it. And but they're fun, and I have a lot of best friends who are male and everything in between. So it's just, they're fun.
You can't, you know, the fun is really important for us and as the reader, and especially nowadays. Harriet?
Yeah, I'm going to caveat this with I love a love triangle, or any other tension. And I think having that third party can be a great source of tension. So with that caveat in place, I also, you know, I think it's really important to have those platonic characters, because I think they help you develop your characters in a way that, you know, a romantic partner can't. For me, my latest series, they have these nations of demons who all have been friends for hundreds of years, and they've all kind of come into the friendship and into the fold at different points. And so they've all got these kind of backstories, they've got these in jokes from kind of hundreds of years ago. And, you know, there's a lot of banter that goes along with that kind of found family. And I think they can, you know, those platonic relationships can really add a lot of levity and a lot of fun, and a lot of support for the main characters. So the relationship stuff can always be like quite heavy and quite serious, and, you know, you feel like the stakes are really high for the characters. And I think that those platonic relationships can add everything else, along with some real light-hearted, heartwarming, you know, support, but in like a fun, slightly more frivolous way.
Mm-hmm. So I have, my next question actually goes in with something Brianna has asked too. She's asked, what's your favorite part to write in a romance novel? And I'm going to stay with our topic. And what's your favorite relationship or character to write? Is it or your most complex, or your least favorite? Your characters always do what you want them to do. I'm going to start with Whitney on that. And that's a 4-part question, but feel free to do which parts you like.
I am a sucker for enemies to lovers, which I think it can be a challenge to do without it being like this unreasonable, we hated each other and now we're in love. Like, how do we like really pull out all the nuances of like, why did you dislike each other, and what steps have been taken to address that harm, and how do we make the love real and, you know, earned and redeemed? So I think that's just a lot of fun for me. Mm-hmm. What don't I like? I don't know. I really like, you know, just the topic of relationships. So I don't know if there's anything I specifically dislike. You know, you were talking about characters kind of running off with a mind of their own. All of my characters have a mind of their own. I'm just, you know, the channel and the scribe, like, okay, this is what you want to do. This is what we're doing. So it's, yeah, it's all fun.
I love that. Darynda?
I agree. It's all fun. I think my favorite, if I have a favorite, my favorite thing is dialogue. I love banter. It's just my favorite thing to write. I can do it all day. I get carried away. My editor has to cut, you know, rein me in. So, okay, we got to get on with the story now. But I would say my favorite is probably my heroine and whoever her best friend is. Almost always. I think that it's just that's such a fun relationship. And the thing about the relationship with the heroine and the hero, if that's what you write, female, male, is that you have to think about so much more than just the banter and just what's going on, because your readers have to fall in love with your hero. And he has to be sexy, or he has to be vulnerable. You have to show depths to him just randomly at any given time for the reader to just fall in love with him and stay in love with him. So it's a little more complex to write than just the BFF, you know, and just the fun times with the friends. But I don't dislike writing anything, I don't think. I mean, I even like writing the villains, whoever the villain is going to be. Those are fun too. So yeah, no dislikes.
Well, the villain can be a really well-rounded character as well.
And should be, absolutely. And like I was gonna say, no character should come to the page with a blank slate. I mean, they all have backstory, including your villain. So of course, you have to give depth to all of them, but.
Harriet?
I, again, love it all, really. I think I really like the exploration part when you're developing a relationship. So that kind of, and usually I start from a place of distrust or kind of wariness for some reason. I don't know why, it just happens that way. And then kind of that, they have to break down that distrust and explore why that wariness is in place, and then kind of, build up towards the characters trusting each other and developing the relationship. So I really like writing that, although it can get a bit heavy. So I think, again, like the banter is always fun to write. Reunion scenes, I love a reunion scene where, because I have these big cast of characters, they go off and do different things and then they come back together, and then you get this nice moment where they're all kind of together again. Twists, I love to write a twist, and when it pays off, that's always a really fun thing to write. I don't like writing character descriptions. I don't know why. I think I'm not really a very visual. I'm a very visual person, but I don't ever, when I read books, I never see people's faces, and I never see what characters really look like. And I don't ever remember what characters' names are either, which is a bit weird. Even my own characters. So I think, I just find it hard. I'm like, oh, I have to describe what these people look like, so because other people are going to care about this, I kind of know what they look like-ish, and it doesn't matter to me hugely when I'm reading. So I find it hard when I'm writing to sometimes really go deep on that.
Oh, interesting. Because we always hear that most writers write because they were readers. So it's interesting that those don't always match up, though.
Yeah, well, I think even when I'm reading, though, I don't. I think it's the same. So I don't appreciate when I'm reading. I don't love reading lots of long descriptions about characters and things, because I don't take it in. It's just not how my brain really works. So I kind of go, I gloss over those pieces. Whereas for other people, it's really important. And they really want to know exactly what this person looks like in very minute detail. I think for me as a reader and a writer, it's the same almost. And I know I've spoken to some readers who think, oh yeah, I want to know everything, and other readers who are like, nope, I just want a quick brief intro, and then let's get into the into the action. So.
I'm door number 2 there. I like the action and the banter. Nicolette?
I just want to say, Harriet, I'm the same way. I can't remember side characters' names. I literally have to write these things down. They're gone. It's like I'll pick their name, and it's like, unless you're the main cast, you're gone forever. You're dead to me.
Yeah. What did I call you again?
Yeah. Yeah, like I'll come back around to a read through and be like, what was this? Who are you? I don't remember you. Yeah. It's hard to keep them all, but as far as favorites, least favorite, my favorite will always and forever be slow burn. Like Whitney said, I love enemies to lovers because it naturally leans itself to slow burn, but there's something about them really taking their time to get to know each other and really build up to get over their emotional wounds that I love. It's just so much fun. I as a reader and as a writer, I don't think I'll ever do insta love mated or not fated mates. I totally respect people who love it. It's just something I love, the anticipation, like to really show my nerd card. I loved an anime called Inuyasha as a kid, and they was just this thing where you just were constantly like, no kiss, and they just never get to it until like, you know, you're hundreds of episodes in, and I that is my catnip 100%. And a lot of my books end up in that way where it's just like, even if they get together, it's like something gets in the way of them actually getting together. So you're constantly with that delayed gratification feeling of like eventually, obviously they all have happily ever after, but you're gonna really suffer until you get there. And then I was thinking, I was, when you were talking about when you're talking about like with if you like it when characters take control, I prefer it they take control, because to me in my brain it feels like they've become real people. If they can take control and they can steer the story in a way I didn't expect, it means that they've taken on a life of their own, and that hopefully for the reader it feels like they've taken on like a real persona. If I have to like really like pull out who they are from them, it's like it feels like they're hiding something from me, and I'm like, okay, let's sit here and like let's do character interviews, let's do something to like suss out what is it that you need from this story, like what are you resisting in this. So that's I think that's everything.
I actually really love that, because I think as a reader, we always feel like when your characters are real,
Yeah.
you know, so if they do take over and they do tell you what they want, you know, they feel more authentic to the reader as well.
Sure.
At least to me. And this actually brought up a question from Alexandra, how to compensate for some of your writing preferences or weaknesses, like favoring dialogue over description. What's your trick? What's your secret? Darynda, I'm going to start with you, I think. I've lost track of who I'm starting with, so I'm just going to start with Darynda.
My trick is layers. I have to go back and layer in stuff, because my first drafts will sometimes be like 95% dialogue. It's like reading a play. Like, oh, I had to describe, my editor would come back with, where are we? We have no clue. What's going on here? Is it night? And so, yes, I have to go back and add in description, because that is not my favorite thing in the world. I'm not going to lie.
Okay. Oh, but you do it, so it's great.
I do. Thank you.
Yeah. Karen, how do you compensate for anything that you're weaker on?
Was that me, did you say?
Yeah.
Actually exactly the same as Darynda. So I will write the first draft, and you hear some authors say they write 100,000 words and then they go through and they chop out 10 or 20,000 words of that. I'm completely the other way around. So yeah, Darynda's nodding. We're in the same camp. I will go through, I'll write it all. I just have to get it out and I have to get it down. And then I'll go back through and say, oh yeah, where are they? What are they doing? Or, maybe which room are they in at this point? Or, or I should probably describe what they look like, at least in some small way. So yeah, I do exactly the same.
Nicolette?
So I'm gonna join the train and say I'm the same as Darynda and Harriet, where I'm very sparse. The first draft is always mostly dialogue, mostly like almost script-like in scene direction, where it's like he stands over here and she stands over there, and I have to go back over and flesh it out with each pass. And me personally, I take a lot of passes because I don't, just the way my brain works, I don't see setting the same way. But I also think that some writers just aren't descriptors. They're just not. There's some very satisfying books that don't have a lot of detailed description, and there's still a satisfying story. So I think if you can get to where you can find your voice, you don't have to do the things you hate. Like if you're like, I was reading something recently. Oh, I think it was 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, and she's beautiful descriptions, but there's not a ton of dialogue, and but it's still a gorgeous book. And you don't have to be perfect at everything. You don't have to be well-rounded in every aspect of writing. You can have your strength, work your strength, and still be a good writer and good storyteller. You want to give enough to be able to make it comprehensible. You don't want to like give absolutely nothing, but enough for people to understand and for people to you'll have things that people will favor you for, basically.
Mhm. Right. I mean, we're human, right? So
Yeah.
Whitney?
Yeah, I mean, I guess similar to Nicolette with focusing on strengths. Yes, we need the rest of it to be, serviceable. It needs to, needs to tell people, are we in a forest or are we in a city? Or, who's speaking or what are they saying? But it's almost like part of your brand as a writer, like, hey, I'm known for doing this, and just accepting that this is what I do. This is part of how I tell stories. I think focusing on trying to make everything perfect not only like slows the story down, but it also kind of makes everything sound the same. So, not every book needs to have description, not every book needs to have dialogue. But for those things where, I know I need to shore something up, I'm also an underdrafter. I know I'm going to add probably 8 to 10% of the word count in editing. My editor, Jenny Chappelle, does a really good framework called like reverse outlining, where you go through chapter by chapter and just developmentally what's going on with the plot, what's going on with the dialogue, what's going on with the characterization, and breaking it down. So it's like on one side leaning into your strengths as a writer, but on the other side having a framework and a structure for how to address that in editing, so that you're just gradually getting better and being more rounded, well-rounded.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing is that most of these changes happen in your own rewrites and redrafts, as opposed to obviously things when it gets to the editor, but you're usually aware of what needs to be changed as you're going over it over and over and again.
yeah, like that first draft is definitely for me. It's literally just like, whoop, there's the story, and then I know I need to go through before I send it to a beta reader, before I send it to an editor, because nobody should have to read my brain dump. And that it doesn't always make sense. There's, what are they doing over there? They were over there. So taking time to have that framework to clean it up when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when you some of the strength for me of an editor is they kind of point out the stuff that you knew that you should have addressed anyway. So like, oh yeah, no, you noticed that thing that I just didn't want to deal with. Okay, I should probably deal with it then. Instead of it's I think sometimes it can. I don't think any writer is really that lazy, but I think sometimes there can be things where you're like, I want to be a little bit lazy, and sometimes
that's so true, Harriet. I just want to say that is so true, because my editor will point things out and I'll be like, oh really, she noticed that? I thought she would totally miss it. Dang. It always surprises me when that happens.
What they're paid for. So I wanted to ask, what is your favorite relationship to write? Is it romantic, platonic? Well, I'm going to say romantic, sisterhood, or bromance. So what's the hardest and what's your favorite? Harriet?
I don't know if I find anyone. I think it's more about the characters for me, about whether they're hard or not, instead of, I don't know whether I find romance harder than friendships. I think it's more about the characters and about how they're behaving together. And I think sometimes I'm more invested in some relationships than others. So, I might have to put a relationship in because I know it's gonna, it's very necessary to develop the plot. I need something to happen, and I'm kind of like, oh, I don't want to write this. I want to go back to this person or this thing that I know I'm going to do next, which I'm more excited about. But I don't think there's anything. I don't think for me it tends to be that I find one necessarily always harder than the other. It really depends on the characters.
Okay, Nicolette.
So for me, romance is always going to be the favorite, but it's also probably the hardest, just because depending on the dynamic of the characters, there's always that. Some are easier. Some of them it flows naturally, it feels right, and some of them you're just like fighting to get them to like work, and you're fighting to make it make sense. I think the thing that I write the least out of because I love like cis-mances, like I just love female relationships. I think they're very powerful. I had a sister who I'm very close with. I have a best friend who I'm very close with. So there's a lot of inspiration to draw from. I think for me, not having a masculine experience, I love romances. Like other people do romances so well, and I think they're so brilliant, but I can't think of a single example of a romance I've written. And it's kind of sad thinking about it because it's like I love it so much, but I just don't have not that I couldn't write a romance, just I haven't had the male experience, so I don't it never occurs to, I pull a lot from personal experience, so it's never occurred to me to like really put in a romance and make it a focal point of the story, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Whitney?
Yeah, I think I would agree with, the statement that it's not really the type of relationship that's difficult. It's like, what are the characters doing? Because so my first book, Elemental, I had, the relationship. And it's like, okay, this is good. I like writing romance, but this is not the relationship that I want her to end up in. So it's like, I love writing romance, but I didn't particularly love writing that one because it's like, I want to get to the other one, the progression. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like what's going on in the story and what do I have, planned out for a series arc. Just in terms of like, where are they going and who's like the relationship of my heart, whether that is romantic or platonic, because there's some friendships where I'm like, okay, you guys are going to be best friends, but you have to stop hating each other first. So it's like, how are we just developing this story? I love writing it, but it is, in its own way, it's all difficult. Not in a bad way, but like in a fun, challenging way.
Mm-hmm. Darynda?
Oh, okay. For me, again, I think the sisterhoods are probably the easiest for me. And I think like Nicolette was saying, it's experience, life experience coming in there. Romance is almost always the hardest. And I think that it's me putting pressure on myself more than anything, because I want this thing to play out perfectly. If it's a slow burn, I want it to, drop in little things here and there to keep the reader hooked, So, but for me, I will say, I think the romance is the hardest. I love writing romance and I love writing the sisterhood. So I love writing all of them, but they're all hard. Mm-hmm. Like Whitney was saying, I don't think writing's hard. Words are hard. That's my favorite saying. I tell everybody, words are hard. You don't understand. But yeah, I would say the romance. But again, I think that's me putting pressure on myself to make it be a certain way. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do a good job, all of you.
Thank you.
Actually, Virginia says that your slow burns are amazing. On Facebook, Marie asks, do you all prefer writing standalones or series involving the same characters? Which is more fun to write? And I know myself, like I tend to read series because I love seeing the characters over and over again. So I don't have a lot of standalones lately. Nicolette, what's your favorite to write?
I've written both, but I tend to lean towards series just because I don't want to give them up either. Like a reader, I'm not done with them. Like I said before, I do a lot of slow burns. So a lot of times it's like a romance developing over books, and standalones can be fun, like because you get a satisfying happily ever after right away. But it just there's so much more to explore and so much more to do with a series, and I always prefer a series just because there's a lot more you can throw at them, a lot more build up and everything else I enjoy writing. So yeah.
Okay, Whitney?
Definitely series. Eventually the characters become people in my head, and I don't want it to sound like I can't distinguish between the real world, but it is that, I think it was Nicolette who was saying like, these are, real people to me. They're going through real things. And I enjoy spending time with them, or I wouldn't write. So it's like, I mean, the first series I wrote, I was like, okay, we're done at 5 books. And then I went and wrote, a paranormal romance trilogy. And then I was like, I miss my friends. So I went back and I was like, okay, we're going to have 5 more books in the series. Surprise. So yeah, definitely love series.
Oh, well, we do too. And when we get that surprise, we're like, Darynda?
Yeah, I think series 2. You know, I've written a couple of standalones. Most of them are just novellas. And I just feel like I don't have time. It's not enough time after writing the Charlie Davidson series, which ended up being 13 books and several novellas and all. Then it's like, you know, I need more time to develop those characters. There's a lot going on in these worlds. And I do fall in love with them and I don't want to leave them. I have learned that no matter if it's a trilogy or a 13 books or whatever, the last book to me is always the hardest to write. First of all, you're saying goodbye. Secondly, you have to tie everything up. And thirdly, it has to appeal to all of your readers. It has to be satisfying. You have to have a good ending. I always like to call it the Breaking Bad. I want to have the Breaking Bad ending to all of my series because that ending was so perfect for anybody who's watched it. Again, from New Mexico, so I'm biased, but yeah, so I will say the last one is the hardest, no matter how long the series is, but definitely series.
Harriet?
Yeah, I've only written one standalone, the rest of the series, and I think the series piece for me is around, I really like complexity, I like big world building, high stakes, and I think that's much easier to do. I love a cliffhanger, so that's impossible to do on a standalone. So, yeah.
Oh yes, you do love cliffhangers.
I do. I know, I'm sorry. I kind of am sorry, but I'm also not sorry because I love them as a reader too. So, so I think, and just, I'm taking part in this anthology for FaRoFeb as well, and I wrote my short story for that. And I sent it to the editor, and she was like, "So is this leading into another story?" I was like, otherwise we're going to have to do quite a lot of tying up of other things, and I was like, I couldn't help myself, I just had to. So I find it pretty much impossible to write stuff which is standalone. I might try at some point to write a same world, but a series of that you can read as standalones in the same world. But then again, I might just get distracted by big problems that need to be solved by the same characters, so I don't know.
Denise is waving to you, Darynda, on Facebook. She's like, I'm actually curious, have you ever written a book about a character, or like in a series, because of reader demand? Whitney, I'm going to start with you on that.
That's part of why I've extended my first series. Was the enemies to lovers was so popular, and everybody's like, but I need more of this guy on my Patreon. They're like, I want more bonus content, more. So I was like, okay, well, if there's demand for this character, then yeah, I'll write it. And then the first book in that series, there was another character, kind of the second favorite, and everybody's like, we want more from her. So it's like, okay, well, we'll have a book focusing on her issues. So, and we're still staying with the overall like series arc, but reader demand will kind of guide me toward who gets more like screen time, page time, just because it is my world, but I also I want to have people enjoying it with me, and I'm happy to do that kind of I don't like the word fan service so much, but like that sharing with the audience.
So, and Darynda, I know that you actually did end the Charlie Davidson series, and amongst a lot of anguish from people. So, how hard was that for you?
Oh gosh, that last book, I cried and cried. That was so hard. So, but I will say that's one reason why I started writing with 1001 Dark Nights, is I could continue because everybody wanted the side character story. So far I've done Garrett's, and I've done Quentin and Amber's. So they had their own little side stories, and Donovan's is coming up. And of course, everybody wants to be Panache's story, and that's coming up too. I'm hoping to pitch that in the next couple of months. And so fingers crossed. And so, yes, people are, mostly they're demanding Bea Panache. So I call her Bea, her name is Elwyn. She is the daughter of my hero and heroine of the Charlie Davidson series. And spoiler alert, if you haven't, you haven't read them, sorry about that. But yes, everybody wants their stories, everybody. So, and I'm so pleased about that because I want to write their stories. So yeah, we get letters every day asking when Bipanache's story is going to come up. So
Mhm. One of those might have been from me, sorry. Harriet?
Not yet, but I think I might write a novella from two of the characters in Nation of the Sword, which is a book that I've just released. A couple of people have already said that they would like to hear their story. So I don't think they deserve a full novel, but I might give them a novella.
Do you find that thrilling, or do you find that like, is it a little bit, not annoying, that's not the right word, but like, are you like, oh, now I have to write about them?
No, I want to anyway. I think I would never, I don't know, I haven't been in this situation where I have like a million people emailing me being like, you must write the story, and it not being something that I want to write. So maybe if I got into that situation, it would be a happy problem to have. But no, I think because it's a story that I would want to write anyway, so it doesn't, not yet.
Okay. Nicolette?
Earlier on in my career, I did a lot of spin-offs because like readers would be like, oh, I want to know what happened here in the prequel. I want to know, or like it became a prequel, but they want to know, oh, I want to know how this happened or this. And I would be really motivated to like do everything. But I've found that the further along I go, the more I get like shiny item syndrome, where it's like I'm always like excited about the next world, about this new character that popped in my head. And I find it harder now to go back. But I have in the past gone back from reader like requests like, oh, what happened, like this unresolved, point of the love triangle. Did he ever get his happily ever after? So you go back and you resolve it and like things like that. But I enjoy it, but I also like, well, I'm always excited for the next thing. I'm like the kind of person that starts like 3 projects at once, even though they shouldn't. And just like, I'm always shiny and I'm off, so it's hard to go back.
It seems to work for you though, so it's awesome. If it's okay with the authors, we might go over a few minutes because we have a few more questions. Yeah, okay. So Brianna says, what inspires you to create such complex worlds? And do you want the readers to imagine the characters the same way you do? And I think I'm at Darynda to start.
What inspires me? Oh gosh, everything. I read a lot, I watch a lot of series and movies, and everything inspires me, everything. And as far as, what was the second part? I'm sorry, I was trying to think what inspires me. Got off on that.
Do you want the readers to imagine the characters the same way that you do?
I give up that right. I don't think I have the right to expect that of readers, because no reader is going to read. They're not going to see the person the way I see the person. A prime example is just hilarious. So I have a Facebook group and they're called the Grimlets, because my heroine's the Grim Reaper in the Charlie series. And their ideas of Reyes are so vast and so varied that it's awesome, but yeah, they're not very often my idea of Reyes, but you can't control that. It's not something you can control, so I wouldn't even want to try. Yeah, I'm like, here's my story, you do with it what you will.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed on Facebook that a lot of artists now will do their own rendition of what they think characters look like. I don't know if you all have received those, but those are fantastic.
They're amazing. Yeah, they're amazing. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can see that.
That's right. And it, might or might not go to that, what we were just talking about earlier. I know Harriet had mentioned it about being too descriptive or not so descriptive, and letting us use our own imaginations. Harriet, what inspires you to write complex worlds, and do you want us to see your characters the way that you do?
I think I might just carbon copy myself and like pretend I'm Darynda, because my answer is the same again as Darynda's. But everything really, TV, other books, and also just our world. Our world is a really complex place. We have huge hugely important geopolitical things going on. We have climate change going on. A lot of my books talk about, not within our setting, but my first trilogy was very much around, inspired by things like energy, scarcity, the way that we use resources, how finite some things are and yet they're not treated that way, power relationships, who gets to make decisions, all of that sort of stuff. I think, I find really fascinating from our world, and also endlessly frustrating. All of that goes into it, really. And it can be anything, it can really be the big problems or the small problems. Just endless inspiration all over the place. And I don't mind how people see my characters. I always find it really interesting when people say, I hate this person, or why is this person so petulant, or I love this person. I always really like it, because sometimes people see them the same way that I do. And sometimes I'm like, great, I'm glad you think they're petulant. They were supposed to be petulant. Or other times I see them completely differently. And that's kind of part of the fun of it for me.
Thank you. Nicolette?
So for me, inspiration comes from a lot of places, like Harriet mentioned, like TV, movies, books. I started out writing fan fiction, so like a lot of like the early thing, you literally like just copying a world and characters, but not that that's the same now. But I'll think of things where, like, especially with tropes, like I'll see a trope and be like, I've never written that trope, I want to do that, that's exciting. Or just being outside in nature and just think like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a scene set here in the woods, things like that. So a lot of inspiration comes from that. And then as far as like, I loved how Darynda put it, where she said she just gives up the right to how they perceive it, because it's true, you just give up how they perceive it. And I'm like Harriet said, where she doesn't give a lot of descriptions. I give them bare minimum. I don't go into a whole lot of detail, because they are going to paint their own picture in their mind. They're going to make their own version of the character in their mind. And like what you were saying about like artists with their own renditions, like I had a fan send me a picture of like her version of one of my characters, and it's just like it is part of you, but then it becomes something more, because the reader experience is so unique to each individual person and their own world of view and their own life that they bring into it. So it's just, you create it, but it becomes something more once a reader gets their hands on it. So it's kind of, you birth it, but it kind of like a child that goes out in the world and lives its own life, basically.
That's amazing. It's a really insightful answer too. Whitney?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of inspiration, the question, what if, is always inspiring to me. So like, you're going about your life, like staying observant as to, your setting, the people in the setting, like what's going on, and just saying like, what if, and then, you're off with an idea. In a setting, in a fantasy world, especially, there's so much opportunity to like go wild with all these different things. As far as like reader interpretations of characters, I think I'll have a slightly different answer. And that's partly because I'm writing both as somebody from demographics who've been historically excluded from publishing, but then also like my characters have also not really been as represented as they could be by somebody from my background. So for me, it is important that they're getting, a few key details around descriptions. My characters are presenting as Black or biracial. So that's very important to me, that they're not, whitewashed, or, for characters who are gay or lesbian, I need those things to stay in, so I don't want to see key parts of identities erased. Otherwise, I mean, like everyone else, I can't control what people are envisioning. It's kind of like with reviews. We don't read reviews. That's not for us. It's for the reader. And once it leaves your hands, it's out of your hands. It's consumable. So I have like some things that are important to me, but as to the rest, I'm like, okay, that's your interpretation.
Oh, yeah. But I think that's a really important point, is that there are some aspects of books that are so important that you don't want them to get lost. So Marie Brown on Facebook says she's a Grimlet. She loves that group. And she has a question that sort of goes along with one of my last questions too, is what's the most favorite paranormal creature to write about? But my question, and Harriet might remember this from last year, is my Shape of Water question. is, have you ever created a character that you have to figure out how they're going to have sex? And actually, Harriet, you're up. And this comes from The Shape of Water, which I don't know if you saw the movie, but like I read a book about like a merman, and I was like, how's he gonna do
it? I've never gone there. I mean, not yet. Never say never. But and it's all the rage at the moment in terms of monster romance. So which I actually don't read a huge amount of, so I can't even be that helpful on that. No, I haven't ever written a character that presents difficulties around.
It's okay, you don't have to. I was just wondering.
And what was the second part? Hang on, there was another one. Oh, paranormal. What's my favorite paranormal character? Again, I've never really written like full paranormal, so reincarnation is probably about the closest, but I don't know if I was going to do it, maybe I don't know, dragons maybe. It's hard. I don't know.
Well, then I would have the Shape of Water question for you.
Yes.
The dragons, yeah. Nicolette?
So I have to say, I love that monster romance is becoming mainstream. I think it's so great to see just different representations of different fantasies becoming accepted in the society, like just in reader populations. I think that's so great. I've never written it myself, not in the sense of like monsters where it's like, well, what is his, like I've never had that like technical issue, I guess, because a lot of like I've written like dragons, like my current work in progress is a dragon shifter. I've written other dragon shifters. I've written, I have a series of Japanese, we'll call them monster inspired creatures, and they all take on human form. So it's never really like a will it fit kind of problem, you know what I mean? Like, because they can take on a human form. So I've never had to deal with that personally, but I think it would be such a fun writing challenge. It's just not something I've ever like actually like dove into to like really like unpack and figure out like, okay, how does this work?
I just have to jump in and say that Kresley Cole has the will it fit question in almost all of her books, but they're all humanoid. So I'm like, what? Seriously. So Whitney, I was thinking about you with this question because you had said that you had written a kobold, and I was like, how does a kobold do it?
No, and so that character doesn't actually, and they're kind of more humanoid in my books. My kind of like was from writing fan fiction. So when you said that you had created, I was like, no, I didn't create it, but I did used to write Mass Effect fan fiction. And Turians are definitely not human. So there's that whole question of how does that work? They're not even mammalian as far as I can remember. So it's like, how does that work with a human? So that was always a fun challenge. And then again, I've forgotten the other part of the question. What's my favorite paranormal? I like elves, but I like my take on elves. And it's kind of one of those, this is why I write things, where it's like, I've taken some lore and I've kind of like spun it into my own thing. So I just really enjoy that one.
Okay. Darynda, now you have the devil, so you might have had to have this conversation with yourself.
And I've had some interesting ones. One that's not published, but I am working on the side. I do have an alien one, and it did come down to okay, how's it going to fit type situation, and it's actually creates a lot of issues in the book, but so I do, but not really published as far as not really. As far as my favorite though, I love all of them. I love vampires and werewolves. I love all of them. Elves, dragons. I'll write anything. I don't care.
That's awesome. And we'll read anything by you as well.
Thank you.
We have a couple of people saying hello to you on Facebook, so you have to check that out later.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to get into our last couple questions, which is, could you tell us one recommendation of a book that you really liked the relationships? Nicolette, you're first.
That's a great question, because there's so many and there's like different reasons. I think the one that stands out the most to me that I've read most recently was Six of Crows, because it's a big ensemble cast, and the dynamic between everybody is so crisp and it's so good and it's so layered and nuanced, and it's doesn't I feel like it's rare for a lot of YA I've read recently where it doesn't play into a lot of like the really tired out like mean girl, like petty jealousy and things like that. It was very raw and it was very real, and I think the emotional buildup of like romantic relationships was really good, and I think the friendship development of everybody was really good. It just I think that's the best example I can think of right now.
Thank you. That's a good one. Whitney?
I'm going to recommend indie because I myself am indie self-published, and I read one recently that was really incredible called Beneath the Shadow Dark by Melissa Polk. It's just, the world building is incredible, brings you in really immersive without dragging the story down. And the relationship is just, it's really relatable in that you've got these two characters and they've got these kind of damaged pasts, and they're trying to both pursue like their own objectives, but then trying to work out like, how do we fit together? So just for me, just like really well written, beautiful prose, beautiful world building. And of course, like I said, I want to shout out a fellow indie.
Mm-hmm. And did I get that right? Beneath the Shadow Dark by Melissa Polk. Okay, great.
Yes.
Darynda?
I am going to go with Dark Wizard by Jeffy Kennedy.
Oh
my gosh. And the reason is because I love her characters. So in this book, I mean, it's almost like, so the female lead is, she was supposed to be a wizard. She was brought up to be a wizard, and she ends up being a familiar. And it shocks her whole family and everything. But she's very knowledgeable. And then the wizard who she ends up marrying is he was not brought up in the system. And so those dynamics are just fascinating to me. And plus Jeffy's writing is just ridiculous. She's just amazing. Oh my God. She can write like 1,000 words in an hour, and they're all beautiful words. I write 1,000 words. They're not pretty words. So it just amazes me how she writes.
But you do have the banter, so you've got that
Thank
going
you.
for you.
Yes, I have that.
And Harriet, what would you recommend?
I also really enjoyed Dark Wizard by Jeffy Kennedy, and her second one is on my TBR, and the third one might already be out. I can't remember. But yeah, they were great. I'm going to recommend Street Witch by another indie, SL creator, and specifically because of the relationships. And I think there were, so the way it's set up is a street witch, and then there's another male witch, and they kind of work in the same household with this with the kind of head of the household, Bran, and he's the romantic interest for the witch. But there's this great dynamic between all three of those characters, because it's completely platonic between the two witches, but they have a really close relationship. They have a great kind of working relationship where they are very much a team. All three of them are very much a team, and I think she deals with it really, really well. And she also deals with the relationship between the romantic couple really well as well. And there's not any steam in the first book. We've had words about it. But they've got this huge backstory, and there's like great comfort between all the characters, and it's really scrumptious. So I'd recommend checking that one out.
I do love a scrumptious book. So now the last question is just what's coming up next for you that we can look forward to? Whitney?
So I've got a book coming out on February 24th, actually. This one right here, Secrets and Truths. It is the first book in my paranormal romance trilogy. The second book will be out June 20th, and then the third one will be out October 29th. So you'll get the full trilogy this year. And that is pretty, I'd say it's steamy. It's not erotica, but it is steamy. So if you're a fan of paranormal romance, Book Life gave it a really solid review that I was really grateful for. So I'd encourage you to check that out.
Excellent, we will. Darynda.
Next is the fourth in my Betwixt and Between series, which is an indie series, and it's called Moonlight and Magic. And what I'm doing is I'm doing the series in 3 different trilogies and then 1 standalone. So this is the first and the second trilogy. So it's the first and the second character that I named after. This is what I was talking about earlier. I named it after my sister, and I didn't, not knowing, I fashioned the whole character after her. I will never do this again, guys. Don't do this, because now I have to have sexy times, and this is my sister. And because I didn't know I was going to go this far with it, you know what I mean? And so it's been a challenge. I'm not gonna lie.
That would be a challenge. But thank you for sharing. Harry, what's coming up next for you?
I laugh because my sister always reads early drafts of my books, and as they get sexier, she's like, it's kind of weird, but it kind of good. So yeah, I'm like, let's just not go there. So yeah, for me, the next one is the 3rd book in the Ancient Souls series, which is Nation of the Stars. So that comes out the 2nd week in March, and that will complete that series. And also a really exciting project, an anthology that we're doing with some of the FaRoFeb authors called Once Upon a Forbidden Desire, Fairy Tales and Other Stories. So we've got 20 short stories with a foreword by Jeffy Kennedy and Grace Draven, and we're just super excited about it, and it's doing really well. So thank you to everyone who's pre-ordering, and you can pre-order now for 99 cents or 99p if you haven't already.
I will add that to my recap. Thank you. I'll add all these books to my recap. Nicolette, what's coming up next for you?
So for me, the next thing is a new book and a new series for me, and it's the first time I've had a new series out in a long time. So it's Dragon Shifter fake engagement story with a dragon shifter who's forced to shift by moonlight. So it's Dragon's Deception, the first book in the Moonlight Dragon series. I don't have a release date yet. If Harriet might remember, I've been talking about this for months. It's one of those things where I got close to finishing and things went awry, and I had to completely redo the last like 25%. And I'm doing my last edit, and it'll hopefully be out in the next month or 2, but I don't know when for sure. I do have a free prequel on my website that I can link if I need to. That's like sets up the world for anybody that's interested and wants to like keep up with it or anything like that.
I keep being like, should I put it in my newsletter now? Should I put it in my newsletter now?
Someday.
Come back later.
Yeah. TBD.
Well, we'll keep a lookout for it for whenever it does come out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and all of your great insight. And I just feel like I know your book so much better now, and what your characters and your thoughts on relationships. So thank you. Thank you everybody for being here, and on Facebook as well. People are stalking you guys on Facebook, so if you want to check the video later, that would be awesome. I will send out a recap to everybody with the video link that we're going to put on YouTube, as well as the book recommendations and upcoming books by our that we've just spoken about. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate your time. This has been lovely.
Thank you so much for hosting.